Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Hughes. Welcome to the Reconcile podcast. We're so glad that you're here. We believe that God is calling all of us to a better future and to look inside and see our potential. That's really what this podcast is all about. So I'm glad that you checked this message out. Hope that you enjoy it and be encouraged. Let's all go out and reconcile the world. For so much of my life, I thought that worship was limited to a Sunday morning experience at a church service. I thought worship was about the people playing music on stage, and really worship is about so much more than what happens once a week. Worship is really about our entire life. And worship is the one thing that we're going to continue to do for all eternity. So I hope you enjoy this new series. It's called You Are What You Love, because what we love is ultimately what we worship.
For those of you that maybe don't know who I am, I know some of you. My name's Scott. I'm one of the pastors here at the Grove. What's that? Oh, hey. Oh, thank you. What's up? Been here at the Grove for a long time, going on 9 years, I guess. Know Nate, obviously, the whole time that he's been here and all that stuff. So super glad to be here with you guys tonight. I've been here maybe once before, something like that, but really glad to spend this time with you. And here's like a little opening promise I'll make, and this has nothing to do with me. This is not anything about me or anything like that. But I believe, that if you listen to what God would have to say to you tonight, right, then you'll leave with something. Like, I believe that, right? It has nothing to do with me. It's just that there's something that will be said. Maybe it's even already happened, but something that as we open up and read the Word, as I share the things that God's kind of laid on my heart, like if you kind of lean into that, you'll leave here with something. I really believe that, and not something really from me, but something from God, and that's what matters. So, okay, so I'm going to start real quick. I'm going to maybe I'm dating myself, but the show was so good it doesn't matter. How many of you ever watched Lost? Oh crap. Lost. Okay, my man. So it's on Netflix. It's about 40 years old. I'm just kidding. No, it's an old series, but it's cool. So it's the series Lost, and these people, the plane wrecks, right? They end up on an island. Nobody can find them where they are. Super good show. There's like, I don't know, it's like everything. There's like, 8, 9, 10, 40 series. I don't even know how many, a lot. Really interesting, blah, blah, blah. But one of the guys in there, he's a con man, and it shows in his past life where he gets this girlfriend, and he's kind of like teaching her how to con people. And there's like quick cons that you can do. Like you kind of walk up and you just kind of, put on a little scam and try to get people to maybe buy something, and that you try to make it look like it's real, but it's like fake, and or whatever, like a quick little con. But then he talks about the long game. Right, the long game, and the idea that the long game is like this, or the long con. Basically, it's just a con where, you're working at someone, or like for weeks, sometimes months, but of course the payoff, that it's a much bigger payoff. That's the point of it, right? So it takes a lot of time. It's this long thing, but the payoff is pretty big at the end if you could pull them off. And then, of course, the cool little thing with the guy is that she's actually then plays a long con on him. So anyway, but you just need to watch it, okay? All right? I'm sure it's on Netflix. I'm almost positive it's on Netflix. I've watched it, with some of my kids. So here's why I share that little thing about the idea of a long game, because you've been like doing some stuff on worship, right? Nate's been talking a little bit about worship, I think, in Romans 12. I think he's been in with you for the past few weeks. We're not going to be in Romans 12 tonight. I'm doing something totally different, all that. But worship, when we think about worship, worship it's about a life of, right, surrendering to God, living for Him, following Him, right? Music's awesome. Music is an expression of worship, but obviously worship is much more than music, right? Worship is about a lifestyle of following God and surrendering and giving ourselves to Him. And guess what? That is a lifetime. That's a long road. Eugene Peterson, you may know him. He's the guy. He passed away. Pastor for a long time. Wrote the Message. Maybe some of you have come across the Message version of the Bible. So Eugene Peterson, he wrote the Message. It's more of like a paraphrase type deal of the Bible. Anyway, Eugene Peterson wrote a book a long, long time ago. The title of it is A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. Such a great title. That's what worship, that's what discipleship, that's what following Jesus is all about in many ways. It is a long road of obedience in the same direction, following Jesus and obeying him just kind of over and over, day in and day out in the same obedience. And so when you're on that road, this road of worship, this long road of obedience in the same direction, when you're on that, guess what happens? A lot of hard things happen. And God even brings some of these hard things in our lives to test us, right? Because when you're tested, kind of like when you take tests, the idea is they're to build you up, right? So, I mean, you study something, then you're tested on it. Why? To see if you've mastered the material, right? And so we go through, so you're on this long road of obedience, this long road of worship, of following Jesus. And then these hard circumstances come about that are tests that God allows you to face and go through. And some of them, I mean, they're really tough and they're hard. But what's the point of the test in this case, okay? In this case, the point of that test is that it's to strengthen your character, right? Because God cares about who we are on the inside, right? He cares about all that ethical, character, moral stuff that's going on inside of us here, our hearts. So these tests from him, they're intended to help shape us and make us stronger in here, right? So we have this character that's forged, ultimately in more and more into the image of Christ. That's the test. Then Satan can come along, and with those same set of circumstances that from God's perspective, it is a test to us, he will use those circumstances to change it into a temptation. Because he will take those same hard circumstances that you're going through that are intended to strengthen your character, and he'll try to bait you and lure you away from this long, hard road of obedience, of going in the same direction, following Jesus. He'll try to kind of bait us away from that. Why? So that we fail. So that the exact same character that God is trying to strengthen through these set of circumstances, he will bring about some destruction and tear down that same character if we fall into the temptation and fail. Does this make sense? I know maybe I don't know if it's too fast, too much. I don't know. I mean, Nathan seems to talk fast sometimes. I don't know. So, okay, so you're with me. You with me? All right, good. Because here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the idea of being on this long road of obedience in the same direction and what we do when these tests come. Because think of like Adam and Eve in the garden, right? So here they are. I mean, they just start out, they're kind of fresh into the deal. They're with God, they're in the garden. Satan shows up, right? Kind of working through this serpent and tempts them to turn away. And they obviously fail, right? I mean, they fall into sin. The people of Israel, God's people Israel, they are meant to follow God in this, the long road of obedience in the same direction over and over and over. I mean, they fail. We all fail. Jesus comes along, and when Jesus comes on the scene, Satan does not give him a pass at all. Satan's not like, ooh, you're kind of a big deal, so I'm going to stay away from you. Satan does not do that, Satan is willing to go kind of toe-to-toe and head-to-head with Jesus. And he does it. That's what we're going to look at. He does that in Matthew 4, these temptations of Jesus. Maybe you've read this before. Maybe you've heard it before. It's the story where Jesus is right before he starts his ministry, where he's going to go gather his disciples. And before any of that happens, Jesus goes and he goes off into the wilderness. And he's there for 40 days, 40 nights, we read, and he's fasting and all of that. And Satan shows up there with him, just like he did with Adam and Eve, just like he does with all of us, to tempt him, to bait him away from the hard, long road of obedience that ultimately for Jesus will lead to what? The cross, right? But Jesus, unlike Adam and Eve, unlike us, unlike the people of Israel, right? Unlike all of them, Jesus doesn't fail. Jesus doesn't get baited away off the path. Jesus doesn't fall into the temptation. He stands against these temptations that Satan brings him. He rises above them. He continues on his hard path that we are all called on. when we follow Jesus. So all I'm hoping that you walk away from tonight when it's all said and done is that there's some things that you see, some things that you pick up from Jesus of how he models to us and shows us how we can stand against temptation. Because here's the thing, right? I mean, all of you, myself included, all of us face temptation all the time, right? Any given day, maybe it'd be better to say every given day, we're facing temptation. Satan will always look for any opportunity to cause us to turn from God, to walk away from a life of worship that we're called to, a life of surrender, a life of sacrifice and following him. So turn over to Matthew 4 if you have a Bible with you, and we'll read some things together here. Matthew 4, right at verse 1. And if you're familiar, how many of you are familiar with this story of Jesus being kind of lured out, face temptations? Okay, some of you. Awesome. Well, if the rest of you aren't, or whether you are or not, I guess it doesn't matter. I think, like I said before, there'll be something in this for all of us. So, Matthew 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit, that's the Spirit of God, into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. So he's not eating during this time. And obviously he was hungry. I'm not sure that needed to be said, but whatever. Just in case you weren't sure because he's Jesus, would he really be hungry after 4? Yes, he was hungry, even Jesus. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." And Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil, this is the third one, took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "And all this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Pretty strong ask. Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. So, that's the story. Let's look back at a couple of them. Here's the first thing that happens. Satan, after Jesus is out in the wilderness, and Satan shows up. Satan says to him, we know that he's hungry, and Satan says, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." And Jesus said, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." So the first temptation that I want us to see is the temptation to feed ourselves. Sometimes we're tempted to feed ourselves. So I'll unpack this of what I mean by this. Interestingly, right before this, at the very end of chapter 3, if you read it, Jesus is baptized. And you know what happens in his baptism? Maybe some of you, maybe you've heard this story. Jesus is baptized. John the Baptist is baptizing Jesus in the Jordan River. And when Jesus comes up out of the water, this voice from heaven says, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." And so right before this, God the Father affirms, "This is my son." And then right after that, Jesus comes and basically says, "Okay, if you are the Son of God," like we all just kind of heard, a few moments ago, "if you are the Son of God, if this is who you are, then why don't you feed yourself?" Right? I mean, obviously you're hungry. Clearly you're hungry. You've been fasting for 40 days, 40 nights. And essentially what Satan is inviting Jesus to do is, remember, Jesus is he too is on this long road of obedience in the same direction. He is. It's no different than what you and I are really called to. It's really not. That is the path that he is on. And Satan comes to him inviting him to say, why don't you have this special relationship with God the Father. I mean, you're his son. I mean, we all just heard it. You just got baptized. We all heard this, the heavens open up and the clouds part and a voice comes out, you're my son, so why don't you maybe you could exploit that relationship, right? And you can with God take this stone and turn it into bread so that you can eat it. But Jesus recognizes all this for what it is. And he does something that's really quite remarkable, right? He doesn't do that, of course. He doesn't take the stone. He doesn't turn to bread. So he doesn't do any of that. Instead, he just stays in this place of being hungry and of facing a temptation to try to change these stones to bread. And in doing that, what he really does is he identifies with us, right? Because think about it this way. Let me flip it around. Let's say Jesus was like, yeah, that's a good idea. You're right. I do kind of have a special thing going on here with the guy upstairs, and I am really hungry. And after all, I mean, it has been 40 days of fasting. I think that covers it. So you know what? I am going to kind of use this relationship, kind of make something happen here, and just make this stone turn to bread. What would you say to that, right? What would any of us say if Jesus did that? We'd be like, well, sure, man. It'd be kind of nice to be Jesus. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all do that, right? We kind of feel that way a little bit. And anytime you're in a tough place spiritually, anytime you're on this long road of obedience and things get hard and some temptation comes that's tough, you would look back at Jesus and you'd be like, yeah, Jesus, I mean, yeah, you kind of held on for a while, but then, when things really got tough and when Satan really showed up and when he really tempted you, yeah, you just kind of gave in yourself to it. So it would make it so easy for us to do that. And it would make it easy for us to just say, Jesus, you don't really understand what it's like to be tempted. You don't really understand how hard it can be for me at times, right? When you think that, right? I would. I mean, this is why in Hebrews, this is not on the screen. I'm just going to read it for you. It's such a powerful verse. It says, for we do not have a high priest, talking about Jesus. We don't have a high priest who's unable to empathize with our weaknesses. Think about this. We don't have one, Jesus, who is unable to empathize with your weaknesses and struggles and temptations that you face. But we have one, it says, who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. So powerful. And the reason why Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, can say that is because of what we just read in Matthew. Because Jesus chose to say, I'm not going to give into that. I am going to recognize this temptation for what it is, and I'm going to instead quote back to you Deuteronomy 8:3. Now, interesting, I don't know if you noticed this, but Jesus uses scripture kind of all through this, and Jesus quotes back to him and says, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Here's what Jesus gets. That, by the way, that's Deuteronomy. Was that Deuteronomy 8:3? That's referring to the Israelites when they were hungry and God finally gave them manna, provided food for them when they were in the wilderness. And the point is simply this. The point is we have physical needs and we feed ourselves physically, but we have something else. We have spiritual hunger and spiritual needs that we can't feed in and of ourselves. Only God can satisfy them. Only God can satisfy them. Here's what Jesus models. Jesus is going to model something to us in all three of these temptations. Here's what he models, and this isn't on the screen, but this is what he models to us here, that we have a hunger in our souls that only God can feed. Have you ever thought about the fact that we all come into this world, right? From day one, when you come out of the womb, we won't think about that too long and hard. That can be frightening. But when we come out of here, when we land on planet Earth, day one, you're totally dependent. You're totally dependent on other people for everything, obviously, right? To take care of you, to change you, to clothe you, and of course, to feed you. Completely, every single human being is totally dependent. And I always think, this is my theory. I could be wrong. This is just my theory. This is not in the Bible. So you could throw this away, what I'm about to say. But I might be onto something. Here's my theory. I think God, from like day one, is training us, like teaching us, like preparing us. You cannot feed yourself completely. I mean, you're going to come out and you're going to be totally dependent on other people, because I want you to learn at the youngest point of your existence, right? I want you to begin to learn and just to have ingrained just to the depth of who you are, that you cannot provide and meet and feed all of your needs. There's something in you, which of course, as we grow much later in life, we come to discover is like this soul that only God can satisfy. And yet, even though God, and so my idea, right, is like prepared us so perfectly to learn that sort of lesson and to get that, so many of us, we miss it. We miss it. And of course, and maybe even more in our modern world where the spiritual is so kind of separated and kind of, Stranger Things is cool, but even with Stranger Things, it's still kind of like, nah, I don't really know if any of that stuff is real. It's just kind of a cool show. Like, it's just, in our modern, we just separate so much that we just think we're so physically oriented that we forget, or that we miss that there is a hunger that only God can satisfy. The temptation is that we can always feed ourselves and be okay. And Jesus says to Satan, here's the thing, I'm not going to exploit my relationship with God, take the stone, turn it to bread. Here's the thing, here's what you're missing, that there is a hunger I have that God can and does feed and satisfy in me. I'm not going to fall into the temptation of thinking I can feed myself. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, good friend, who was talking about her kid and all the parenting struggles and all the mishaps that are going on, how difficult and how challenging, and so she's kind of going on about it. And then she said this. She goes, and this is pretty much a quote. I kind of jotted it down here, but I think I'll remember. It's pretty simple. She was just like, she said, quote, I've tried everything, right? To do everything in me that I can to teach her, to redirect her, to correct her, to put her on the right. I've done everything I can. You name it, I've tried it. And I just thought, oh, yeah, you've done everything you can, like to feed yourself, but you're not depending on God. You've tried everything you can except God. Completely left God out of this equation. And that's a real problem, because we can't feed ourselves. We can't feed our souls. And even though I think Jesus tries to teach us that lesson at a young age, sometimes we still miss it. And if we don't allow God to feed us, we won't stand under temptations. I think this first point, while these temptations, they kind of build and get worse, this one is just so important that we get, that God wants to feed you, right? That God wants to feed your soul. That God doesn't want you to starve. God doesn't want you to be hungry. You go to, Chipotle, whatever, that's great. I get it, right? You're physical, you have to, but God not only wants to, but he is the only one that can feed you in a way that you and I need to be fed, and the only way we can be satisfied. And if we don't have that, we will not continue in a life of worship. We will not continue on a long road of obedience in the same direction. We just won't. We won't have the stamina to make it, right? We'll fall off track. It's pretty much guaranteed. I do a lot of running. I've done some marathons. Man, nothing sucks more than at the end of a marathon. I mean, it's just everything hurts so bad, and it's like there's just everything causes you. Like I just want to take a shortcut. I'm dreaming about like all sorts of things. Sitting down is a good thing. I'm dreaming about a lot of walking, not running anymore. All of these things. It's so. I don't know if any of you run. Anybody in here done a marathon? Oh, you can't take your hat off like that was like kind of like a no, but good try. Okay, you done one, then you know. It's kind of great training in a lot of ways because it's sort of like there's so many correlations to something like that to the spiritual life. God wants to help you get there. Here's the second temptation. And these will go a little bit faster. We spend a little more time because some things kind of carry over. Here's the second temptation. It's the temptation to prove yourself. So the first one is to feed yourself. The second one is to prove yourself. So he says in verse 5, then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels, is out of Psalms, Satan's quoting the Bible again. He will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. And Jesus answered him, quoting from Deuteronomy again, and said, it is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. So this temptation is to prove yourself. This temptation for Jesus is to make this big spectacle. Right? So the temptation is if Jesus is standing on the temple and he throws himself off and angels come sweeping in and kind of catch him right before he goes like splatter all over the ground, what's everyone going to think? They're all going to think like this is the Messiah. He's the one. I mean, the one that we've been looking for, the one that has been written about and told about. I mean, surely, clearly, he's the one. Look at this. And then a revolution will begin. It's a pretty big temptation, right? Jesus, here's a way. Instead of going down this path, instead of going down this hard road, look, you can create a spectacle event. And you can have angels come and swoop you up, and people will begin to follow you based on that. But here's what's that, and he says, because in Psalms it says, and then Satan quotes this psalm, that if you fall off, the angels are gonna, it's completely out of context, right? I mean, that's not the point of that passage in Psalms anyway. The point is that God will come to our rescue in his time and in his way, and he will care for us. Not that we can force God or try to twist God's hand to do something to make us look good. There's a word for that, right? Manipulation. Right? God, if you will do this, if you will show yourself, reveal yourself in this way so that I look good here, that's gonna work out well for me. And it's this same temptation. Jesus would face this again when he's at the cross. If you are the Son of God, come off the cross, save yourself, make this big spectacle event. But that comes at the cost, though, of forcing God's hand, of trying to get God to act on our terms instead of his terms. See, Jesus just sees right through all this. He's like, no, I'm not going to manipulate God. I'm not going to try to force my Father's hand to do something, to create this spectacle, to bring these events about. You know what I'm going to do instead? I'm just going to keep walking the long, hard road of obedience in the same direction, and I'm going to trust him instead. But see, this is the spectacle, though. The spectacle is often what we want to see. I think of the story of Elijah. Such a cool story, right? Like these prophets of Baal and then Elijah, and then they have the showdown, and then they say, hey, we're going to put some wood out here, and whichever gods or God sets the wood on fire, that's the real God. So the gods of Baal, they're out there, they're praying to their gods, light the wood on fire, it doesn't light on fire. This goes on for hours. They start cutting themselves and bleeding and showing all their sacrifice, and nothing happens. And then Elijah's turn, he's like, okay, I'm going to pray to Yahweh, the God of Israel. I'm going to ask, but before I do that, why don't you just like soak the whole thing with wood, so that way, or soak all the wood with water, so it makes it that much harder for it to catch on fire and burn, right? So they pour all this water all over it, and then Elijah's like, hey, God, can you just light it on fire? And then he like sends out like a nuclear bomb and just blows the thing up, and it's like, see, this God's real, your God's fake. Super cool story. That's the way we often want God to work, right? Like create some spectacle event. Like, God, I know I'm not totally prepared for this, so here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna put the book under my pillow and I'm gonna sleep on it. And I need you to just like put it all in there, well, all that information just while I'm sleeping. And then when I go in, I can get the best grade on this thing, and it'll be a bit of a miraculous spectacle event, but it'll make me look good, right? Because then I'm gonna look like I've mastered this stuff. And sometimes we're trying to force and manipulate God to prove ourselves, to make ourselves look good. Or it's like, maybe you just know, like, man, I don't have any chance with that girl. Like, she's way out of my league. But so God, it's a bit of a request here, but I'm gonna walk out in front of the car, like right before she comes out in the street. And then I'm gonna put my hand out and just stop the car, and the car's gonna stop. God, I need you to make it. But if you can make the car like run into me and like the car gets dented, but nothing happens to my leg, that would be awesome. And then I'll just kind of look at her and give her like a little wave like that. And then boom, now I will prove myself. I will win her over. I will clearly be the man of her dreams if we can just create a bit of a spectacle, miraculous, showboating moment. I need to prove myself, God. Can you do this for me? And the problem with all of that is that we're trying to force God, right? We're trying to bend God to what we want him to do so that we look a certain way. And Jesus is like, I'm not going to throw myself off the temple. I'm not going to create some big spectacle. Sure, yeah, some people would be like, oh my gosh, he's the Messiah. Look what happened. Holy cow. And then they'd all run and follow him. It's like, but that's not the way this is going to happen. That's just not the way it's going to happen. And so instead of trying to force and manipulate, what I'm going to do? I'm just going to keep following you in this life of worship. I love, though, that Satan keeps quoting scripture to Jesus, right? Hopefully you've noticed that by now, right? Satan keeps quoting, which tells you that just kind of knowing what this says, right, isn't the most important thing, but Jesus is the one that can flesh it out and that obeys it. And that is the point of us growing in this. That's wisdom. Wisdom isn't knowing what the Bible says. Wisdom is knowing the truth of God and then obeying it, right? Applying it, living it out. That's wisdom. And that's what Jesus does here. And so this is what he models to us. I told you, every time we see this temptation, but we also see something that Jesus models for us that we can truly follow in his footsteps with. And this is what he models. That faith is about trusting God to act in his time and not on our terms, right? Faith is about trusting God that he will act in his time and on his terms, not on our terms. And a lot of times, man, we just want God to do things the way we want him to do things. And faith is about trusting him that he will do it his way at his time. I had a good friend of mine and my wife's, known her for years. When she graduated college, she was hoping to kind of get married and have kids and a family like many people do. Don't have to do that, but that was kind of her dream and wish, right? And, years went by, didn't happen. And she, she just remained faithful the whole time. She's like, God, maybe it'll never happen, God, but if it does happen, I'm going to trust you that you are going to provide a husband for me in your time and on your terms. And I'm not going to try to force you to try to bring someone into my life. Now, that doesn't mean that she didn't she went on a date, she did different things, of course, right? But she didn't try to force something. And she stayed faithful, she stayed true to God, she didn't sleep around with guys, she didn't do any of that stuff. She just stayed faithful to God. And she's like, God, I'm gonna trust you in your time, that you will act on your terms, not on my terms. Like a year ago, when she's 40 years old, she got married for the first time. Great guy. And it's just like, wow. I mean, honestly, she kind of thought like, it's just probably not going to happen, but you never know. I mean, God has his way of doing things. And the key thing here that Jesus models to is that faith is about trusting God to act on his terms, not trying to force him on our terms. And here's the last one real quick, and we'll wrap up and be done here, is the temptation to save yourself. Verse 8, the very last temptation, it says this, again, the devil took him to a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. He said, all this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. I mean, Satan is saying this to Jesus, bow down and worship me. And Jesus said, away from me, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Satan did gain some authority over the kingdoms of earth, way back in the Garden of Eden when he caused Adam and Eve to fall into sin. I mean, when he won that battle with them and they fell into sin, there was some authority that Satan gained in this world. He doesn't have ultimate authority, but he definitely has some authority and power in this world over the kingdoms of earth. There's no question about that. And so Satan offers this to Jesus, right? I mean, this is like the ultimate temptation to say, look. I know you're on the long, hard road of obedience that's going to the cross. But look, if you just bow down and worship me, I will give you authority over the kingdoms of the earth. You don't have to go down. You don't have to stay on this road. You don't have to go through the cross for that to happen, which is exactly how it did happen for Jesus because he stayed obedient. He said, you don't have to do that. You can instead bow down and worship me, and I will give you the authority that I have over them. But Jesus isn't focused, right? Because he hasn't been feeding himself. He's been allowing God to feed his soul. And so he's not even focused on the kingdoms of earth. He's focused on the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. Satan offers him all of the creation, and Jesus is like, no. My eyes, right, are on the creator, not the creation. I don't even want this stuff that you could, whatever authority you could or would turn over to me. I don't even, it says, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And that's where Jesus' focus is. That's where his heart is. And he models that obedience to God, even when it costs him everything. Even when it costs him everything. And it would cost him everything, right? Because Jesus would stay the course. He would stay the course, and he would find himself on a cross. But what Jesus knows, and he says it a few chapters later, hey, look, there's a big gate, and there's a big, broad, wide road that leads to destruction. But there's this much smaller gate, and there's this narrow road. And it is a road, it is the long road of obedience in the same direction. And that is the road that I am walking on. And I'm not going to fall into the temptation to feed myself or to prove myself or to save myself. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to keep allowing the Father to feed my soul, to satisfy me spiritually in ways that nothing else or no one else can do. And I'm not going to force or manipulate God to do these big spectacles so that things happen to make me look a certain way. I'm not going to force my agenda or my ways. I'm going to trust God for his timing and for his will and for his ways to come about. And I will continue to obey him even though it will cost, even though it'll cost me everything. Because in the end, what has he gained? We gain everything. When we give everything for God, we gain everything from him. So I hope, guys, that you leave here tonight. I hope that something in those, something in the way that Jesus models living in the face of temptation on his path of worship, on his road of obedience in the same direction. I hope you take something away from for you tonight. And that if nothing else, you say, man, how am I feeding my soul? How am I feeding it so that God can satisfy me in ways that only he can do? Hey, let me pray for you guys before you go, and I think they're going to do one song and close out. God, I thank you so much for this example that you have lived for us, Jesus. Jesus, I thank you that you face these temptations, first of all, so that you can truly say that you understand us in our weaknesses, in our temptations, in our struggles. You truly, truly get it. You know what it's like. And you didn't just do them for a little bit and then like back out at the last minute. Like, you stayed the course. And God, I pray that we would learn from and live in the way of Jesus, the example that he set for us. I pray that each person here in this room would find a way that they would allow you to feed their souls every day, that they would find strength and nurture and satisfaction that is only found in you. And God, I pray that at the times when we're tempted to try to force you to work on our terms, God, help us to just trust you for your timing and for you to act in your way. And God, I pray that each one of us would continue. We have years ahead, decades for many of these people here, for all of us maybe, decades of following you. And I pray that you would keep us on this long road of obedience in the same direction. And that even though it may and will cost us various things along the way, God, you are worth every one of those sacrifices because you have sacrificed everything for us. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your desire to know us, to be with us, to draw us close to you. Pray this in your name.